Welcome to Biventa Audio. You're listening to part 2 of the book by author Camille Ella, The Weight You Don't Have to Carry. This recording continues the reflections from the first part, moving deeper into the quiet, often unspoken weight we learn to carry through expectation, responsibility, and the stories we tell ourselves about who we need to be. If you haven't listened to part 1, you may want to begin there. The essays in that first part lay the foundation for what follows here. But if you're arriving now, you're welcome to listen at your own pace and take what resonates. These essays are not instructions. They are gentle observations meant to be heard slowly, without urgency or effort. You don't need to listen closely. You don't need to remember everything. You only need to be present. This is part 2 of The Weight You Don't Have to Carry by Camille Ella, here on Biventa Audio. Let's begin. Essay 7, Unlearning the Need to Pretend You're Okay. There comes a point in life when pretending to be okay becomes heavier than simply admitting that you're not. For many people, the act of pretending has been practiced for so long that it feels almost automatic. A reflex you don't question, a mask you forget you're wearing. You learn this reflex early. You learn to smile when something hurt, to hold back tears because someone else needed you to be strong, to say I'm fine because the truth felt too complicated to explain. You learn to swallow disappointment so you wouldn't create tension, to stay composed because falling apart felt unacceptable. Pretending became a way of surviving, a way of maintaining peace, a way of protecting others from your truth, and a way of protecting yourself from the possibility of being misunderstood. Over the years, pretending starts to feel like identity. People begin to describe you in ways that sound flattering but are quietly painful. You're so strong. You're always so calm. You never complain. You handle everything so well. What they don't realize is that these compliments point to the version of you who hides her struggles, not the version who feels them. Being okay becomes your role, even when you're far from it. But the truth is simple. No one is meant to be okay all the time. Life is not built that way. Hearts are not built that way. Humans are not built that way. Pretending you're okay doesn't make the pain go away. It just buries it deeper. And buried emotions don't disappear. They wait. They wait for a moment when your guard slips, for a quiet night when your thoughts are loud, for a soft moment when your heart cracks open. Pretending creates pressure, not the kind others can see, but the kind that sits just beneath the surface. It builds with every forced smile, every withheld emotion, every moment you convince yourself that honesty will make things worse. Over time, pretending becomes an invisible cage. You function, you manage, you cope, you hold everything together, but inside something feels increasingly disconnected. You feel distant from yourself, unseen in your relationships, tired in ways that sleep cannot fix, and lonely even when someone is sitting right next to you. This loneliness is not the absence of people. It is the absence of honesty. Pretending isolates you from others because no one can meet you where you actually are. Pretending isolates you from yourself because you can no longer feel your own truth clearly. And the longer you pretend, the harder it becomes to remember what it feels like to simply be real. But pretending isn't just a habit, it's a protection you once needed. Maybe you learned to pretend because expressing emotion led to criticism, or because the people around you were too overwhelmed to handle what you felt. Maybe your struggles were minimized or dismissed, or revealing your pain made you feel exposed in ways that were not safe. Whatever the origin, the pattern made sense at the time. Pretending kept you safe when you didn't have another option. But you are not in that version of life anymore, and the protection that once helped you is now holding you back. Unlearning the need to pretend you're okay begins with a single, quiet shift, not toward falling apart, but toward honesty. Honesty doesn't always begin with speaking. Sometimes it begins with noticing. You notice the small ways you minimize your own emotions. You catch yourself saying, "It's not a big deal," even though it's been weighing on you for weeks. You say, "I'll handle it," even when you're overwhelmed. You tell yourself, "I'm probably just overreacting," even when your feelings are valid. You swallow your discomfort the moment it rises. These tiny dismissals may seem harmless, but they are part of the language of pretending. They reinforce the idea that your emotions deserve less space than everyone else's. They slowly convince you that your inner experiences are inconveniences that should be contained. Unlearning pretending begins with recognizing your moments of minimization, not with judgment, but with understanding. Something inside you learned a long time ago to shrink itself for safety, to stay composed to maintain connection, to believe that being emotional carried consequences you didn't want to face. Once you see this, you stop blaming yourself for pretending. You stop calling yourself dramatic for having feelings. You stop criticizing yourself for being sensitive. You stop expecting yourself to remain calm when life is anything but calm. A subtle, quiet, profound shift begins. You start allowing yourself to feel small emotions without rushing to hide them. You acknowledge stress instead of downplaying it. You admit when you're tired. You begin being honest with yourself in the privacy of your own mind. This is the first step. Letting yourself tell the truth to yourself. You don't have to confess it to anyone else yet. You don't have to expose every part of your inner world. You don't have to unravel in someone's arms to prove you're being honest. You simply have to stop lying to yourself about how you feel. Pretending doesn't begin with others. It begins with a voice inside that says, "Don't feel that. It's too much." Unlearning begins when you answer back, "Actually, it's not too much. It's real." Allowing yourself to acknowledge your own feelings is not weakness. It is the foundation of emotional maturity. But honesty also brings discomfort. When you stop pretending, you start confronting truths you've avoided for years. Truths about your limits, your pain, your exhaustion, your desires, your wounds. Sometimes these truths arrive as relief. Sometimes they arrive as grief. Often they arrive as both. Unlearning pretending means realizing that you don't have to be the strong one every moment of your life. It means realizing that showing emotion is not a burden, that your softness is not a liability, and that the people who truly care about you want to know how you really are, not how well you can perform stability. The fear that honesty will push people away is a leftover story from a past that required silence for survival. But adulthood offers a new reality. The right people can hold your truth without losing respect for you. Vulnerability does not repel connection, it deepens it. Pretending keeps you untouched, but it also keeps you unseen. Honesty exposes you, but it also allows you to be understood. There is a moment in every healing journey when the truth becomes harder to ignore than the fear of speaking it. A moment when pretending feels like a weight you can't carry for even one more day. A moment when your inner voice, quiet for so long, begins to say, "Please stop hiding me." This moment does not always look dramatic. Sometimes it's simply sitting alone and feeling a pressure in your chest that you can't explain. Sometimes it's answering "I'm okay" and hearing how unconvincing it sounds even to you. Sometimes it's noticing how drained you feel after conversations where you never once said how you truly felt. Sometimes it's waking up tired in a way that has nothing to do with sleep. These small moments signal something profound. You are longing for emotional honesty. But longing and unlearning are not the same. Unlearning requires courage, and courage grows slowly, through small acts that seem insignificant at first, like pausing before you say you're fine, like admitting, even silently, today was hard, like letting yourself sigh without immediately pulling yourself back together, like resisting the urge to smile automatically, like giving yourself permission to acknowledge that you are carrying more than you let others see. Every small act of honesty weakens the grip of pretending. And yet, with honesty comes fear. Fear that people will think you're too much. Fear that they will feel burdened by your reality. Fear that letting your guard down will make you vulnerable in ways you don't know how to handle. Fear that the version of you who feels deeply is somehow less lovable. But this fear misunderstands something essential. Your realness is not a burden. It is a bridge. People connect with you not because you're always composed, but because you are human. They trust you not because you always stay strong, but because you are sincere. They feel safe with you not because you're flawless, but because you are honest. Pretending creates distance. Honesty creates intimacy. But intimacy requires risk, the risk of being seen. This risk can feel terrifying, especially if you've spent your entire life being the one who listens, supports, and holds everything together. You don't want to shift the balance. You don't want to impose your emotions on others. You don't want to be the one who needs. But the truth is this: you have needs because you are alive. You have emotions because you are human. You have limits because you are real. Pretending you're okay doesn't protect your relationships, it starves them. It deprives people of the opportunity to know you deeply. It deprives you of the connection you quietly crave. It deprives your heart of the softness it deserves. And over time, pretending becomes its own form of loneliness. Not because you're alone, but because no one knows what you are truly carrying. Unlearning pretending means stepping out of that loneliness. It means giving your inner world permission to exist outside your silence. It means trusting that someone can care about you even when you're not composed. It means believing that your reality is not too heavy for the people who genuinely love you. And perhaps most importantly, it means learning that you don't need to earn the right to be honest. As you begin to unlearn the habit of pretending, something unexpected happens. The world doesn't fall apart. You don't lose the people who truly care for you. You don't suddenly become fragile. Instead, you begin to breathe in a way that feels more natural than anything you've done in years. You start expressing small truths. I'm tired today. I feel overwhelmed. I'm having a rough time lately. I don't think I'm okay right now. These statements might feel terrifying at first, but they open space for connection. They allow the people in your life to show up for you in ways you never gave them the chance to before. Being honest doesn't mean unraveling completely in front of everyone. It doesn't mean sharing every detail. It doesn't mean losing control. It means letting your emotional reality exist without shame. For many people, this is the hardest part. Letting yourself be seen not just in your capable moments, but in your vulnerable ones. You may have learned that vulnerability made you a burden, but the truth is, vulnerability makes you relatable. It invites compassion instead of distance. It creates connection instead of pressure. And yet, being honest with others often starts with being honest with yourself. When you allow yourself to admit what you're feeling, even privately, you begin to soften. You stop fighting your own emotions. You stop gaslighting your own reactions. You stop forcing yourself back into composure every time you slip. This inner permission becomes the foundation of external honesty. Something else shifts, too. You begin to let go of the expectation that you must present the best version of yourself at all times. You start recognizing that the people who want you in their lives don't want a polished mask. They want the real you, even when the real you is struggling. Unlearning pretending also reveals something you may never have considered before. It is not your job to protect others from your emotions. You are not responsible for ensuring that no one ever sees you tired. anxious, sad, or overwhelmed. You are not responsible for making every interaction pleasant at the cost of your inner world. You are not responsible for managing someone else's comfort by hiding your discomfort. This belief that you must always appear fine is rooted in a misunderstanding of love. Love is not maintained through perfection. It is deepened through truth. When someone is allowed to see the real you, your fears, your doubts, your tenderness, your exhaustion, they're given the gift of authenticity. In return, they offer understanding, support, and closeness. This is how emotional safety is created. And once you experience this safety, pretending becomes harder to return to. Not because you're incapable of masking anymore, but because you've tasted what it feels like to exist without the weight of performance. You realize that you can be honest without losing your strength. You realize that you can be soft without being judged. You realize that you can be vulnerable without being abandoned. You realize that you can be human without losing your dignity. These realizations begin to weave themselves into your self-perception. You start to see yourself not as someone who must hold everything together, but as someone deserving of support. Not as someone who must be resilient at all costs, but as someone allowed to rest. Not as someone who must be okay, but as someone allowed to be honest. With honesty comes connection, real, sustaining connection, the kind that makes pretending unnecessary. The real transformation begins not when you stop pretending in front of others, but when you stop pretending in front of yourself. When you let your emotions surface instead of burying them. When you admit that you are hurting instead of numbing yourself. When you allow your heart to speak without immediately silencing it with logic or shame. This kind of honesty becomes a turning point. It teaches you that your emotions are not threats. They are signals. They point to what matters, to what hurts, to what needs attention, care, or change. When you stop pretending, you begin to understand your inner world instead of fearing it. You begin to notice patterns that once felt impossible to see. You learn to identify what drains you, what fulfills you, what wounds you, what heals you. You develop a deeper relationship with yourself, one rooted in truth rather than pressure. And as this relationship grows, your connections with others become more authentic. People can finally meet you where you actually are. They can offer support you once believed you didn't deserve. They can comfort you in ways you once thought were too much to ask for. They can love you without the filter of your constant composure. You learn that letting someone see your struggle is not a burden. It is an invitation to intimacy. Unlearning pretending does not mean you lose control. It means you lose the illusion that control is the only way to be loved. It means you begin trusting that your unfiltered self, the tired self, the emotional self, the uncertain self, is still worth showing, still worthy of connection, still worthy of care, still worthy of being known. You start discovering that the people who truly matter in your life are not impressed by how well you can hide your pain. They are moved by your courage to be real. And the more you let yourself be real, the less you feel the need to perform. The pressure that once lived in your chest begins to soften. The loneliness that came from hiding begins to fade. The exhaustion that came from holding everything together begins to lighten. The fear that honesty will drive people away begins to dissolve. You start to breathe differently, not cautiously, but freely. You start to express your needs without rehearsing every word. You start to trust your emotions instead of doubting them. You start to show up in your relationships as your whole self rather than a polished fragment. And perhaps the most meaningful shift of all is this. You begin to feel at home within yourself. You no longer abandon your emotions to keep the peace. You no longer silence your truth to appear strong. You no longer hide your heart behind a practiced smile. You no longer carry the weight of pretending that everything is fine. You learn that being human is not something to conceal, it is something to honor. Honoring your humanity means allowing your emotions to be seen, allowing your truth to be heard, allowing your heart to be held, allowing your inner world to matter. This is the freedom that comes when you stop pretending you're okay. It's not loud or dramatic. It's steady, grounded, and deeply liberating. You are no longer surviving behind a mask. You are living fully, truthfully, and without apology. Essay 8. The quiet weight of feeling behind in life. There is a heaviness that many people carry but rarely speak about. A quiet, private fear that somehow they're falling behind, not compared to who they used to be, but compared to everyone else. It's a subtle ache that surfaces during slow nights, after scrolling through social media, or when a friend shares a milestone that feels far away from your own life. You tell yourself you shouldn't compare, that everyone has a different timeline, that you're doing your best, but none of these reassurances fully dissolve the feeling. The weight of feeling behind isn't logical, it's emotional. It's born from invisible timelines you never meant to accept, shaped by expectations you absorbed without noticing, reinforced by stories of how life should look by now. And even when you know those stories are unrealistic, they still cling to you. You begin noticing the pressure in moments that seem harmless. When someone your age is getting married, when someone younger than you is succeeding quickly, when a friend buys a home and you're still figuring things out, when someone announces a pregnancy while you're still healing from your own uncertainties, when people talk about 5-year plans and you're still trying to get through this week. These moments don't hurt because you're jealous. They hurt because they remind you of the questions you quietly carry. Am I doing enough? Did I miss something? Should I be further by now? What if I'm too late? These questions echo in places you rarely let anyone see. The painful part is that feeling behind doesn't always come from a lack of effort. Sometimes it comes from circumstances you never chose, from healing that took longer than you expected, from responsibilities that slowed you down, from starting over when you thought you had things figured out, or simply from being human in a world that measures everything by speed. No, one teaches you how to handle this quiet pressure. The pressure of watching people move forward while you feel like you're standing still. No, one teaches you how to comfort yourself when it feels like everyone else knows where they're going. No one teaches you how to decipher the difference between falling behind and simply taking a different path. But here is something worth remembering. Feeling behind is not evidence of failure. It is evidence that you care about your life. You care about meaning, progress, and becoming someone you can be proud of. That care is not a weakness. It's a sign of depth. Yet if you look closely, you will notice that the timeline you're measuring yourself against was never truly yours. It was handed to you by culture, comparison, expectations, and stories repeated. So often they became internal truth. This borrowed timeline creates a subtle cage. You move through life, not according to what matters to you, but according to what you believe should have happened by now. And the heaviness grows, not because you're lost or incapable, but because you're using a map that was never designed for your journey. The quiet weight of feeling behind is not a sign that your life is failing. It is a sign that your life is asking to be lived according to your own rhythm, not someone else's. What makes the feeling of being behind so painful is that it often happens in silence. You don't announce it. You rarely admit it. You carry it privately, tucked beneath your responsibilities, your composure, your everyday efforts to move forward. It shows up in moments when you least expect it. When you see someone thriving without knowing the battles they fought to get there. When you hear peers talk about promotions or stability while you're still navigating uncertainty. When you catch a glimpse of who you thought you'd be by now and realize you're not there yet. This quiet weight grows heavier because it feels like you're the only one carrying it. But you're not. Many people move through life with the same pressure pressed against their chest. They just hide it well. They wonder if they've missed some invisible window of opportunity. Question whether they're moving too slowly. Fear that life is slipping through their fingers while they're trying their best to hold it together. What makes this fear powerful is that it thrives in isolation. The less you speak about it, the more it grows. The more you compare yourself, the more it distorts your perception. The more you try to keep up with timelines that are not your own, the more disconnected you feel from your truth. And your truth, unlike comparison, is gentle. It knows what you've lived through, the healing you've had to do, the weight of responsibilities you never asked for, the moments you had to pause when others could keep going, the internal mountains you climbed just to stand where you are now. Comparison never sees any of that. It sees the surface, the curated life, the filtered highlight, the milestones revealed without the struggle behind them. But your truth sees everything underneath. The moments you had to start over, the nights you couldn't sleep because your future felt uncertain, and the risks you took that didn't pay off immediately. The time you needed to heal from wounds no one else knew about. When you compare your journey to someone else's, you forget the complexity of your own life. You forget that timelines are shaped by experiences, not age. You forget that progress is not measured by how quickly you reach milestones, but by how deeply aligned those milestones are with who you are. Feeling behind often comes from believing that time is slipping away. But time doesn't disappear just because your path looks different. It bends, shifts, and expands in ways you only recognize in hindsight. Some of the most meaningful transformations happen later than expected. Some of the strongest relationships form after seasons of solitude. Some of the most stable careers emerge after a series of wrong turns. Some of the most profound self-discoveries happen after years of confusion. You are not late. You are simply evolving on a timeline that reflects your reality, not someone else's. But to see this clearly, you must start questioning the expectations you've been carrying. Who told me I should be further by now? Is this goal even mine? Am I behind? Or am I just comparing? What if my pace is exactly what my life needs right now? The quiet weight begins to soften when you stop treating life like a race and begin treating it like a path you're allowed to walk at the speed that is right for you. One of the most surprising realizations you will ever have is that progress doesn't always look like movement. Sometimes it looks like slowing down. Sometimes it looks like healing before moving forward. Sometimes it looks like pausing long enough to breathe, reflect, and understand what truly matters. But when you're caught in the feeling of being behind, slowing down feels dangerous. You worry that resting means losing momentum, that taking your time means you'll fall even further, that pausing means failing. These fears come from treating life like a straight line when in reality, it is made of seasons. Seasons of building, waiting, uncertainty, discovery, healing, redirection, and quiet growth that no one else can see. In seasons of building, everything feels fast. You make decisions, move forward, take chances. In seasons of healing, progress feels invisible. You look inward, repair, gather strength you don't even know you're gathering. But healing seasons are not wasted time. They are preparation. You may not see it now, but the moments where you felt still, lost, or uncertain were shaping you into someone capable of handling what is coming next. The moments where you felt behind were often the moments where you were aligning. Feeling behind can sometimes mean you are on the verge of clarity, the verge of a shift, the verge of becoming someone with deeper understanding and stronger intuition. But you can only see this when you stop measuring your life by someone else's pace. Comparison shrinks your perspective to inches. It zooms into one tiny part of someone else's story and magnifies it until your entire life feels inadequate. But if you zoomed out even a little, you would realize something powerful. Everyone's timeline is uneven. Everyone has seasons where nothing makes sense. Everyone has chapters that do not look impressive from the outside. Everyone has moments where they question everything. The difference is only this: some people speak about it and some people hide it. The ones who hide it often look like they're ahead, but no one truly moves forward without moments of confusion, hesitation, or quiet rebuilding. Feeling behind doesn't mean you're failing. It means you're comparing your internal journey with someone else's external highlight. And the solution is not to rush. The solution is to reconnect with your own pace. Your pace is not slow, it is specific. Your timeline is not late, it is personalized. Your path is not lacking, it is unfolding. You begin to understand this the moment you acknowledge that your life is not a checklist. It is a process of becoming, sometimes quickly, sometimes quietly, and becoming cannot be rushed. Not if you want the growth to be real. The weight begins to lift when you allow your timeline to belong entirely to you. The moment you begin to let go of comparison, something inside you softens. Not because your circumstances suddenly change, but because you stop treating your life like a competition. You stop rushing. You stop apologizing for your pace. You stop assuming that speed is proof of success. Instead, you start noticing the things you once overlooked. You realize that even in seasons of uncertainty, you were learning resilience. Even in seasons of waiting, you were developing patience. Even in seasons of confusion, you were gaining self-awareness. Even in seasons of stillness, you were building emotional strength. The truth is, the moments where you felt the most behind were often the moments where you were actually catching up with yourself. Because being ahead is not about arriving early, it's about arriving ready. And readiness doesn't always come quickly. It comes from experiences that shape you, soften you, stretch you, and teach you. Sometimes you need more time to understand what you truly want. Sometimes you need more healing before stepping into a new chapter. Sometimes you need more clarity before committing to a path. Sometimes you need more rest before taking the next step. These needs are not delays, they are direction. But for someone who has been taught to value achievement over alignment, slowing down for the sake of yourself can feel like rebellion. You may feel guilty, anxious, or as though you're disappointing expectations no one explicitly stated, but you still feel deeply. You may worry that honoring your pace means giving up. Yet something liberating happens when you finally allow yourself to move at the speed that feels natural. You begin to trust yourself again. You begin to trust your timing, your intuition, the idea that life is not running away from you, and the belief that things will align when you are aligned. This trust becomes a kind of inner peace. Not the peace that comes from having everything figured out, but the peace that comes from no longer forcing yourself into a life that doesn't fit. And when you trust your own timing, everything changes. You stop comparing your progress to others. You stop resenting your own journey. You stop feeling behind and start feeling present. Being present allows you to see opportunities you once missed because you were too focused on the timeline in your head. Being present allows you to appreciate small steps that once felt insignificant. Being present allows you to nurture the life in front of you instead of chasing the life you think you should already have. You begin to see that some of the best parts of your story will happen later than expected. Not because you're late, but because the right things often require the right version of you. And that version of you is forming right now, even if you can't see it clearly yet. Feeling behind often means you are in the middle of becoming someone wiser, more grounded, more sincere, more aligned with your truth. This is not stagnation. This is transformation happening quietly. The weight starts to lift the moment you stop asking, "Why am I not there yet?" and start asking, what is this season preparing me for? Because every season prepares you for something, even the confusing ones, even the quiet ones, even the ones that feel like nothing is happening. And when you finally understand that, the fear of being behind turns into something else entirely. A deeper trust that your life is unfolding at the pace meant for you. There comes a moment when the pressure you've been carrying begins to shift, not because the world changes, but because your understanding of yourself does. You stop measuring your worth by how quickly you reach certain milestones. You stop assuming that there is a single correct order for your life to unfold. You stop believing that falling behind is the same as failing. Instead, you begin to see your life as something organic, not linear, a landscape, not a race, a journey, not a checklist. You start recognizing that every person's story is shaped by different experiences, obstacles, timing, and inner battles. You realize that the people you once compared yourself to are navigating struggles of their own. Struggles you cannot see. Struggles they may never speak about. Struggles that shape their timelines in ways invisible from the outside. And suddenly, the idea of being behind begins to lose its meaning. Because how can you be behind in a life that was never meant to look like anyone else's? The moment this truth settles into your heart, something in you exhales. For the first time, you feel a sense of spaciousness, a gentle permission to be where you are without apology. You begin to appreciate the value of your own pace. You see how certain delays protected you from choices you weren't ready for, how certain pauses allowed you to grow in ways faster paths never could, how certain setbacks rerouted you toward paths with deeper meaning, how certain seasons of stillness helped you reconnect with yourself. You begin to see that your life is not late. It is layered, rich with lessons, growth, resilience, and untold strength. The quiet weight begins to lift more fully when you stop asking, what should I have achieved by now? And start asking, who am I becoming as I move through this? Because the truth is, the version of you that emerges from slow seasons is often the version with the deepest wisdom, the most grounded self-awareness, the strongest sense of alignment, and the clearest understanding of what truly matters. This version of you will choose with intention, not pressure. This version of you will move with confidence, not comparison. This version of you will value depth over speed. This version of you will recognize progress, even in the smallest steps. And when your next chapter arrives, because it will, you will be ready for it not because you forced your timing, but because you honored it. Feeling behind was never a sign that you were failing. It was a sign that you were still growing, still unfolding, still learning to trust the rhythm of your own becoming. And the moment you stop forcing your pace to match someone else's, you begin to realize something incredibly freeing. You are not behind. You are simply on your way, at your own speed, in your own time, on your own terms. And that is enough, more than enough, because it is real. Essay 9. Outgrowing the version of you who settled. There is a version of you, a younger, quieter, more uncertain version, who settled for less than she wanted because, at the time, she genuinely believed that less was all she deserved. Not because she lacked ambition or desire, but because she lacked clarity about her worth. This version of you accepted things that now break your heart to remember. She tolerated relationships that offered affection only in fragments. She stayed silent in moments when her voice mattered. She held on to friendships that drained her because loneliness felt worse. She apologized for things that were never her fault. She let people treat her in ways that made her shrink. She stayed in situations long after she knew she should leave. She settled, not out of weakness, but out of survival. And if you look closely, you'll see that she wasn't wrong for doing so. She was doing the best she could with the emotional resources she had. She was choosing based on the version of safety she understood at the time. She was making decisions from a place of hope, not truth. She was navigating her life with instincts shaped by past wounds, not future wisdom. This is why outgrowing her feels complicated. Part of you feels proud that you've changed. Part of you feels sad that she ever thought settling was necessary. Part of you feels angry that she didn't walk away sooner. Part of you feels protective of the person she was, confused, hopeful, and trying. Outgrowing the version of you who settled is not about judging her. It's about understanding her so deeply that you finally free her. Settling did not happen randomly. It happened gradually, one small compromise at a time. You told yourself, it's not that bad. You told yourself, maybe this is the best I can get. You told yourself, I don't want to lose this, even if it hurts. You told yourself, trying again feels exhausting. You were choosing the familiar over the unknown, comfort over uncertainty, predictability over possibility. You settled because you wanted connection, belonging, and the safety of not being alone. You settled because you thought staying was safer than risking loss. And in many ways, that younger version of you needed to settle, not because she deserved less, but because settling was a stepping stone, the place where she learned what not to repeat. Eventually, something inside you began to shift. A small voice, quiet at first, started saying, "This is not enough. I want more than this. I deserve better treatment. I'm tired of shrinking myself. I don't feel seen here. I don't feel valued here." This voice did not demand immediate change. It simply asked to be heard. It asked you to pause. It asked you to consider what you truly wanted. That was the beginning of outgrowing her. Outgrowing happens slowly, not in one breakthrough moment, but across many small realizations. You begin noticing the difference between peace and comfort. You begin noticing how certain people make your world feel smaller. You begin noticing how much energy it takes to sustain connections that don't nourish you. You begin noticing how you silence your needs in order to stay close to someone who should have held them. And slowly, you start becoming a person she never imagined she could be. Someone who chooses alignment over approval, presence over performance, truth over fear. The moment you begin to outgrow the version of yourself who settled is subtle at first. It's not a dramatic rejection of your past or a sudden surge of confidence. It's a soft shift, one that arrives quietly, almost imperceptibly. You begin to feel uneasy in places where you once convinced yourself to be comfortable. You begin to sense that certain relationships drain more than they give. You begin to realize that silence is costing you more than speaking ever would. You begin to notice that the peace you're trying to protect is not peace at all. It's avoidance. These realizations feel unsettling, not because they're wrong, but because they're true. Truth often enters your life through discomfort. As you grow, the things you once tolerated begin to stand out. Behaviors you once excused begin to feel unacceptable. Circumstances you once normalized suddenly feel heavy. You start to see the subtle ways you betrayed yourself just to keep something or someone from slipping away. You start remembering moments where you pretended you didn't care, minimized your needs to keep the peace, settled for breadcrumbs and called it connection, accepted attention instead of love, effort instead of consistency, potential instead of commitment. These memories sting not because you were wrong, but because you've grown. Growth gives you new eyes that can finally see what your past self could not. Eyes that look at the younger you with compassion instead of judgment. Eyes that understand why she stayed, why she hoped, why she accepted less. You begin to realize that outgrowing her does not mean abandoning her. It means loving her enough to not become her again, because somewhere inside that girl who settled was a deep, unspoken longing. A longing for someone to choose her fully, to meet her halfway, to see her worth without her begging for it. She wanted what everyone wants: to be valued, to be safe, to be loved. She settled because she hoped. She settled because she cared. She settled because she believed people could change. She settled because she believed she could carry the relationship alone if she had to. But eventually, you learn that love is not about carrying, it is about meeting. Meeting each other with consistency, honesty, effort, and mutual respect. This understanding marks the beginning of your evolution. You stop romanticizing potential. You stop making excuses for people who don't show up. You stop confusing attachment with compatibility. You stop prioritizing someone else's comfort over your own self-worth. You stop staying in relationships that demand you abandon yourself to keep them alive. Slowly, you begin to rise out of the version of yourself who believed that settling was enough. You begin to notice your inner standards shifting, not in a rigid, demanding way, but in a clearer, more grounded way. You begin to crave reciprocity instead of intensity. You begin to desire presence instead of promises. You begin to value emotional safety over temporary validation. The things that once hooked you no longer hold the same power. The attention that once felt flattering now feels insufficient. The almost relationships that once consumed your thoughts now feel draining. The people who made you feel small no longer feel worth the effort. This is not bitterness, it is clarity. Clarity you earned through experiences that broke you open. Clarity that came through pain, reflection, and truth. Clarity that transformed your expectations and strengthened your boundaries. Outgrowing the version of you who settled is not about rejecting her. It is about finally becoming the person she hoped you would be. There is a very specific moment in your growth when something inside you finally clicks. A moment when settling no longer feels like a safe choice, but a self-betrayal. This moment doesn't always arrive dramatically. Sometimes it comes through the simplest realization: I don't deserve to feel this small. And once you see it, you cannot unsee it. The things you once tolerated begin to weigh differently. The words you once overlooked now echo louder. The behaviors you once justified now feel disrespectful. The imbalance you once ignored now feels impossible to carry. This shift isn't fueled by anger. It's fueled by awakening. Outgrowing the version of you who settled doesn't require an apology. It requires recognition of everything she endured, everything she believed, everything she hoped for, everything she compromised. You begin to understand why she accepted so little. She thought love required endurance. She thought loyalty meant staying no matter what. She thought patience would fix what effort alone cannot. She thought loss was scarier than disappointment. She thought wanting more made her demanding. But now you know more. And with knowledge comes responsibility. The responsibility to not shrink yourself again for the sake of belonging. As you grow, your heart becomes more discerning. You start choosing differently, not perfectly, but consciously. You begin to value consistency over intensity, presence over potential, respect over attachment, honesty over guessing games, maturity over excuses. And above all, you begin to value yourself. This self-value is not loud. It doesn't need to be. It shows up in quiet ways. You don't chase clarity, you ask for it. You don't wait for effort, you require it. You don't beg for reassurance, you communicate your needs. You don't cling to people who confuse you. You choose people who stabilize you. You don't shrink your desires, you honor them. This is the beginning of alignment. Alignment with your truth, your growth, and the future you actually want. And as this alignment deepens, you begin to realize something profound. You were never asking for too much. You were asking the wrong people. The younger version of you didn't understand this yet. She thought love was about proving your worth. She thought she needed to justify her needs. She thought acceptance was earned by being less, asking less, expecting less. But you now understand that love is not earned through smallness. Love is built in spaces where your fullness is welcome. This realization changes everything. You become less interested in relationships that drain you. You become less tolerant of people who can't meet you halfway. You become less attracted to emotional ambiguity. You become less willing to abandon your boundaries to keep someone close. Not because you're hardened or bitter or closed off, but because you've grown into someone who finally understands her worth. And something else happens during this evolution. Your compassion for your past self expands. You stop blaming her for staying too long. You stop shaming her for wanting connection. You stop criticizing her for waiting for change that never came. You stop resenting her for not knowing better sooner. Instead, you thank her. Because without her experiences, her heartbreak, her confusion, her hope, her mistakes, her lessons, you would not have the clarity you have today. You outgrew her because she walked every step that allowed you to rise. When you finally rise into the person you were meant to become, you don't look back at the version of you who settled with anger or embarrassment. You look back with understanding because she carried you through a season where settling felt safer than reaching. She did not fail you. She protected you with the tools she had. But now you have new tools. You have the clarity she never had. You have the standards she was afraid to claim. You have the courage she wished for in quiet moments. You have the strength she was slowly building, piece by piece, heartbreak by heartbreak. Outgrowing her is not an act of rejection. It is an act of completion. You are becoming the person she needed to see. Someone who believes in her worth so deeply that settling is no longer an option. And with this new version of yourself comes a new way of choosing. You choose relationships that feel steady instead of relationships that feel uncertain. You choose people who show up instead of people who make excuses. You choose communication instead of guessing games. You choose mutual effort instead of one-sided hope. You choose peace instead of chaos. You choose alignment instead of attachment. You stop settling because your heart finally understands something it didn't before. Consistency is not too much to ask for. Respect is not too much to expect. Emotional safety is not a luxury. Clarity is a right, not a reward. Your needs matter just as much as anyone else's. And when you embrace these truths, your life begins to change. Quietly at first, then unmistakably. You no longer return to situations that made you feel small. You no longer cling to people who offered the bare minimum. You no longer sacrifice your peace to prove your love. You no longer abandon yourself for the sake of belonging. Instead, you expand. You expand into someone who honors her intuition. You expand into someone who listens to the discomfort that signals misalignment. You expand into someone who trusts her ability to walk away. You expand into someone who no longer fears being alone, because being alone with truth feels lighter than being together in self-betrayal. This expansion is what the younger you dreamed of, but didn't yet know how to reach. Now you can, and in this new chapter, you carry her with you, not as a source of regret, but as a reminder of how far you've come. Every moment she settled taught you something. Every compromise revealed a truth you now honor. Every heartbreak strengthened the boundaries you have today. You did not outgrow her because she was weak. You outgrew her because she prepared you for the life you're stepping into now. A life where your worth is recognized, not negotiated. A life where your voice matters. A life where your heart is not asked to shrink to fit someone else's limitations. A life where you no longer accept the love you can get, but the love you deserve. A life where settling is no longer your story, because becoming yourself is. Essay 10. The healing that happens when you walk away. There's a kind of healing that does not begin with forgiveness, reflection, or understanding. It begins with distance. It begins in the quiet space that opens when you finally walk away from what has been hurting you, from what you tried to fix, tolerate, or endure for far longer than you admit. Walking away is not the dramatic moment people imagine. It is not always loud. It is not always final. It is not always brave at first. Sometimes it feels like defeat. Sometimes it feels like uncertainty. Sometimes it feels like guilt woven with relief. Sometimes it feels like a quiet grief for the version of your life you hoped would work out. But beneath all those feelings is the truth your heart has been whispering for months, sometimes years. I cannot stay here anymore. And that is where healing begins, not in staying strong, but in choosing yourself. Walking away is an act of self-respect that often unfolds long before the moment your feet actually move. It begins the first time you realize your voice is shrinking, the first time your needs go unnoticed, the first time your intuition tightens in your chest, the first time you pretend you're okay, but feel something breaking inside. Healing begins in that recognition, the quiet understanding that staying is costing you more than leaving ever will. But leaving isn't easy. You don't walk away simply because something hurts. You walk away when you realize that the pain is shaping you into someone you don't want to become. Someone more anxious, more guarded, more exhausted, more distant from herself. This is the moment when the weight becomes undeniable, when maintaining the connection costs you pieces of your peace. Even then, walking away doesn't feel triumphant. It feels tender. It feels mournful. It feels like stepping into a life you're not sure how to live yet. But the act of walking away is also the act of walking towards something, even if you don't know what that something is. Walking toward clarity, walking toward strength, walking toward self-trust, walking toward the parts of yourself you abandoned to stay. People often imagine that healing begins after the pain has stopped. But in truth, healing begins the moment you choose not to keep wounding yourself. And walking away from what hurts is one of the most courageous choices you will ever make. Not because it's easy, but because it asks you to believe in a future you cannot yet see. This is the profound thing about distance. It allows you to breathe differently. It allows you to think without tension. It allows your nervous system to rest. It allows the fog to lift. It allows your heart to finally exhale. Only then do you begin to understand how much staying drained you. Only then do you begin to feel the strength returning to your body. Only then do you begin to reclaim the pieces of yourself you had to hide in order to hold everything together. Walking away is not the end of the story. It is the opening chapter of your healing. In the early days after you walk away, the world feels strangely quiet. It's a silence you don't quite know how to inhabit yet. A silence that feels both peaceful and unsettling. You are no longer surrounded by the noise that once dictated your emotions, but you are also not yet familiar with the sound of your own steady breathing. This in-between space is where healing begins. At first, it may not feel like healing at all. It feels like uncertainty. It feels like emptiness where something used to be. It feels like questioning whether you made the right choice. It feels like wanting to run back simply because the familiarity feels easier than rebuilding yourself. But still you stay, not because you feel ready, but because your heart knows this distance is necessary. Healing is rarely obvious in the beginning. It looks like small shifts, almost unnoticeable to anyone but you. You start waking up without the tension that used to greet you in the morning. You You start realizing you don't have to brace yourself emotionally before speaking. You start noticing you're no longer tiptoeing around someone's moods. You start understanding how much space was taken from you and how much is returning. And as the days pass, you begin to see the truth you couldn't see before. Leaving wasn't a loss. It was an act of reclaiming. You reclaim your time, your peace, your energy, your voice, your clarity, your sense of self. These pieces return slowly, sometimes timidly, as if checking to see whether it's safe to come home. As they return, your inner world begins to soften. You start experiencing moments of calm you forgot were possible. You begin sensing a quiet freedom, the kind that comes from no longer living in emotional survival mode. This freedom is delicate at first. It doesn't arrive as confidence. It arrives as relief. Relief that you don't have to explain your worth. Relief that you don't have to negotiate for emotional space. Relief that your mind no longer feels chaotic. Relief that you don't have to carry the heaviness of what wasn't yours to fix. This is the stage where self-forgiveness begins, even if you're not aware of it. You forgive yourself for staying longer than you should have, for hoping too hard, for accepting less, for the versions of you that tolerated what she didn't deserve. Healing deepens the moment you stop blaming yourself for the choices you made while trying to protect your heart. Walking away gives you the space to see that you are not weak, you were loyal. You were not foolish, you were hopeful. You were not blind, you were trying. You were not behind, you were learning. And learning is what healing asks for. In this distance, you begin to see the situation and yourself with gentler eyes. You begin to realize that leaving was not a single decision. It was a series of small awakenings that finally aligned. It was every moment you felt unseen, every moment your heart ached, every moment you held on even when holding on was hurting you. Leaving was the moment your inner truth grew, louder than your fear. And that truth continues to guide you now as the healing unfolds, slowly, quietly, steadily. As the distance grows, something unexpected begins to happen. Clarity arrives. Not all at once, not loudly, but in gentle waves that wash over you, revealing truths you couldn't see while you were trying so hard to stay. Clarity shows you the moments you ignored your intuition, not because you were naive, but because you wanted to believe in the best outcome. Clarity shows you the ways you silenced your needs, not because they were unreasonable, but because you thought asking for more would push someone away. Clarity shows you the emotional labor you carried, not because you enjoyed it, but because you felt responsible for the connection. And clarity shows you something even more powerful. You were not the problem for wanting to be treated with care. Distance makes this visible. Space turns emotional noise into understanding. Time makes the truth feel less painful and more freeing. This is the stage of healing where you begin to see how staying shaped you. Not in a self-blaming way, but in a self-realizing way. You begin to notice how much you tolerated, how deeply you tried, how often you minimized your feelings, how long you held on to hope, how much you gave without receiving the same in return. And instead of breaking your heart, this understanding begins to rebuild it, because now you can finally see your effort for what it was. Proof that you are capable of loving with depth, loyalty, sincerity, and courage. You didn't walk away because you didn't care. You walked away because you cared so much that staying would have destroyed the parts of you that make love possible. Healing deepens when you realize this. Walking away was not the end of your love. It was the beginning of your self-love. As clarity settles, you begin to experience another shift. Your self-trust slowly returns. You trust your intuition more. You trust your boundaries. You trust your ability to choose better next time. You trust that your heart knows the difference between connection and attachment. And gradually, the fear of being alone begins to fade. Because being alone with your truth feels lighter than being together in confusion. Because solitude feels peaceful when you're not abandoning yourself in it. Because you begin to enjoy the parts of your life that were once overshadowed by emotional strain. This is where the real healing begins, not in replacing what you left, but in reconnecting with yourself. You start discovering pieces of yourself you didn't realize you had lost. Your creativity returns. Your laughter feels real again. Your energy stabilizes. Your confidence grows quietly. Your future no longer feels like something to fear. And perhaps the most meaningful part of this stage is noticing how your inner world begins to expand without the weight of someone else's expectations. You realize you can breathe deeper. You realize your days feel lighter. You realize your mind feels clearer. You realize your heart feels safer. This is the healing that only walking away can give you. Not healing through fixing, forcing, or holding on to hope, but healing through release, space, truth, and choosing yourself. Over time, quietly, almost subtly, the healing that began with distance deepens into transformation. The pain that once felt sharp becomes something softer, something you can hold without trembling. The memories that once drained you lose their power. The emotions that once overwhelmed you begin to make sense. You realize that healing is not forgetting. Healing is understanding. Understanding yourself. Understanding your patterns. Understanding your worth. Understanding the difference between holding on and being held back. And in this understanding, you step into a new version of yourself. Someone steadier, someone clearer, someone more whole. Walking away was the moment you saved yourself. Healing is the moment you finally recognize it. This is when you begin to trust your own strength in ways you never have before. A strength that isn't loud or hardened, but grounded and calm. A strength that doesn't need to prove anything. A strength that comes from honoring your truth instead of fighting it. You begin to look back, not with regret, but with clarity. You see why you stayed for as long as you did. Hope, love, fear, loyalty, longing. You see why you had to leave. Self-preservation, self-worth, truth, growth. You see that both were part of your becoming. And then, slowly, something even deeper emerges. You start to feel proud of yourself. Proud of the courage it took to step away from what was familiar. Proud of the strength it took to choose a harder path for the sake of your well-being. Proud of the resilience it took to rebuild yourself piece by piece. Proud of the honesty it took to listen to your intuition instead of your fears. This pride does not shout. It sits quietly in your chest, steady and warm. It becomes a reminder that you can trust yourself, that you can survive endings, that you can choose yourself even when it feels terrifying, that you deserve relationships, environments, and experiences that do not ask you to shrink. And with that realization comes one of the most profound forms of healing. You begin to open again, not recklessly, not naively, not in the same ways you did before, but slowly, gently, intentionally. You open to new connections without losing yourself in them. You open to love without abandoning your boundaries. You open to possibility without clinging to illusions. You open to the future without feeling haunted by the past. Walking away taught you how to protect your heart. Healing teaches you how to trust it again. And somewhere along this journey, you understand the truth you weren't ready to accept before. Leaving what hurt you was not the end of your story. It was the beginning of your return to yourself. Your return to your strength, your clarity, your needs, your joy, the person you were always meant to become. This is the healing that only distance can bring. The healing that arrives not when the pain stops, but when you finally stop choosing it. And as this chapter of healing continues to unfold, one thing becomes clear. You didn't just walk away from something. You walked toward yourself. Essay 11. When you outgrow the life you built. There comes a moment, often quiet, often unexpected, when you look at your life and feel a shift you can't quite name. Nothing is wrong, not exactly, but nothing feels fully right either. You move through familiar routines, familiar relationships, familiar choices, yet something inside you whispers, I don't fit here anymore. This is the moment when you begin to outgrow the life you once built. It doesn't happen all at once. It unfolds slowly, like realizing a pair of shoes is too tight only after you notice the blisters. What once felt comforting now feels constraining. What once felt aligned now feels too small. What once felt like your identity now feels like a version of you that no longer matches who you're becoming. Outgrowing your life is strange because the life you built is filled with things you once deeply wanted, things you prayed for, worked hard for, and were proud of. And so the discomfort feels disloyal, almost ungrateful. But growth has never asked for permission from who you used to be. You outgrow careers you once dreamed of because your priorities change. You outgrow friendships that no longer nourish you emotionally. You outgrow habits that once helped you survive but no longer support who you are now. You outgrow versions of yourself that were built on fear instead of self-awareness. Outgrowing is not failure, it is evolution. Yet evolution is uncomfortable. It challenges you to let go of identities you've worn for years. It pushes you to admit truths you tried to ignore. It invites you to step into unfamiliar territory, one that feels both exciting and unsettling. You begin noticing subtle signs, craving silence in places where you once craved validation, feeling restless in routines that used to feel safe, sensing a dull ache whenever you try to force yourself back into old expectations, feeling drained by conversations that once energized you, becoming aware of how much you've been holding yourself back just to keep the life you built intact. This restlessness isn't impatience, it's insight. It's your inner world realizing that you have grown past the foundation you once relied on. It's your intuition nudging you towards something bigger, deeper, more aligned. It's your spirit recognizing that you haven't been living as fully as you could. But outgrowing your life is complex because what you built is familiar, and familiarity can be comforting even when it's limiting. So you stay a little longer. You convince yourself it's just a phase. You try to adjust your mindset. You try to shrink your desires. You try to quiet the part of you that wants more. But the truth doesn't go away. It keeps returning, softly, persistently, honestly. You feel it in conversations that no longer match your values. You feel it in moments when your purpose feels blurred. You feel it when you can't ignore the growing distance between who you are and who you're pretending to be. This is the beginning of a transition you didn't choose consciously but can no longer avoid. The beginning of recognizing that your life is shifting even if you don't know why yet. The beginning of seeing your own potential clearly enough to know when something no longer fits. Outgrowing your life doesn't mean your past was a mistake. It means your past was a stepping stone, necessary, meaningful, but not final. You are not losing yourself. You are outgrowing a version of yourself. And that is where the next chapter of your becoming begins. The confusing part about outgrowing your life is that nothing catastrophic has to happen for the realization to arrive. No crisis, no major event, no dramatic turning point. Sometimes you simply wake up one day and feel a shift in your chest, a quiet sense that the life surrounding you is no longer the life that reflects what's happening inside you. You begin to see the difference between comfort and alignment. Comfort is what keeps you in familiar routines. Alignment is what pulls you toward your potential. When you're outgrowing your life, these two forces begin to clash. You feel torn between who you were and who you're becoming, caught between the security of the familiar and the call of the unknown. But this tension is not a sign that something is wrong. It is a sign that something within you is waking up. As you grow, your inner world expands faster than the structures you once built around it. The dreams that once felt big now feel small. The goals that once defined you now feel outdated. The places where you invested your heart no longer feel like home. Your identity stretches beyond the boundaries that once contained it. And you begin asking questions you never thought you'd ask. Is this still what I want? Why does this no longer feel fulfilling? What part of me am I suppressing to maintain this? When did I stop hearing my own voice clearly? These questions don't arise to dismantle your life. They arise to illuminate it. Growth makes you aware of the spaces where you've settled for routine at the expense of purpose. Growth makes you aware of relationships that keep you anchored to old versions of yourself. Growth makes you aware of dreams you pushed aside because they felt too risky. And as this awareness deepens, so does your discomfort with staying small. But outgrowing your life doesn't mean you suddenly know what you want next. Most of the time you don't. Instead, it means you become aware of what you can no longer return to. You begin feeling a quiet resentment toward your own stagnation. You begin mourning the person you became just to fit into spaces that were too tight. You begin longing for a life that feels honest, even if you can't describe it yet. This longing is not a flaw. It is direction. It is your future self pulling you forward. It is your heart asking for room to evolve. It is your intuition whispering that the life you built was never meant to be your final form. But outgrowing the life you built also means confronting fear. Fear of disappointing people who expect you to stay the same. Fear of letting go of identities you've worn for years. Fear of stepping into a life that will require more of you. More courage, more truth, more presence. Yet, the most important fear is this. What if I leave behind something good and never find something better? This fear is powerful. It can keep you in jobs you've mastered but no longer love. It can keep you in friendships that feel familiar but not fulfilling. It can keep you in patterns that feel safe but not meaningful. But here is the truth that growth eventually teaches you. Your life will never expand if you keep shrinking to fit the spaces you've outgrown. Outgrowing your life is the universe's way of nudging you forward, gently at first, then more insistently, until staying becomes more painful than changing. And once you reach that point, something begins to shift inside you. You stop trying to force yourself to feel satisfied. You stop pretending the old dreams still fit. You stop silencing the part of you that wants more. This is the moment when the next chapter begins. Not through certainty, but through honesty. Outgrowing your life creates a very specific kind of loneliness. A loneliness that doesn't come from being alone, but from knowing that the world around you no longer mirrors who you've become. It's the loneliness of sitting in spaces where you used to feel understood, yet now feel strangely out of place. The loneliness of talking about things you no longer believe in. The loneliness of showing up as someone you no longer recognize. This loneliness isn't a punishment. It's a sign of inner evolution. You are expanding, but your environment hasn't caught up yet. And so you feel the distance between you and your old habits, your old choices, your old patterns, your old priorities. You feel it in conversations that used to excite you, but now leave you empty. You feel it in friendships where the connection remains, but the alignment fades. You feel it in routines that once felt satisfying, but now feel restrictive. This stage of outgrowing is uncomfortable because you haven't yet stepped into your next chapter. You're simply too big for the old one. It's the emotional equivalent of trying to stay in a room that's becoming too small. You can stay, technically, but eventually the walls start pressing into you. And this pressure creates an internal shift. You start craving depth instead of familiarity, silence instead of noise, meaning instead of distraction, growth instead of repetition. These cravings are not indicators that something is wrong. They are your compass. They point you toward a life that feels richer, fuller, more aligned with who you truly are. But before you can step into that life, you must acknowledge an uncomfortable truth. Outgrowing your life means outgrowing parts of yourself too. Parts of you that settled. Parts of you that stayed quiet. Parts of you that tolerated what didn't feel right. Parts of you that built your identity around other people's expectations. Parts of you that were scared to want more. Letting go of these parts feels like shedding a version of yourself you once relied on, and in many ways it is. But shedding isn't loss. Shedding is preparation. Preparation for a life that requires a stronger, clearer, more honest version of you. You begin to notice internal shifts. You no longer want to be around people who drain your energy. You no longer want to pretend you're satisfied when you're not. You no longer feel comfortable dimming your light. You no longer want to justify your dreams. You no longer accept environments that make you feel disconnected from yourself. This is growth, not glamorous, not easy, but transformative. And with this transformation comes a deep, quiet realization. You cannot build a bigger life while holding on to a smaller identity. You cannot expand while clinging to what restricts you. You cannot evolve while pretending you haven't. You cannot rise while forcing yourself to stay grounded in old soil. So the loneliness you feel right now is not a sign that you're lost. It's a sign that your life is rearranging itself around your evolution. Eventually, something inside you shifts from fear to readiness. Not because you have all the answers, but because you finally understand one truth with absolute clarity. The life you built was good for who you were, not for who you are becoming. And once you see that clearly, you can never unsee it. Essay 12. The soft strength of starting over. Starting over is one of the quietest forms of bravery. It rarely looks bold from the outside. There are no announcements, no applause, no dramatic music playing in the background. Most of the time, starting over looks like ordinary life, except something inside you has shifted in a way no one else can see. It begins with a feeling, a whisper, a subtle pull towards something different, a desire for change you can't yet articulate, a longing for a life that feels more honest, more aligned, more yours. But the decision to start over is not a single moment. It is a collection of smaller ones. The moment you admit something no longer feels right. The moment you realize you can't force yourself to stay the same. The moment you acknowledge the quiet ache that tells you you've outgrown a chapter. The moment you stop trying to make your life look like something it doesn't want to be anymore. These moments are the beginning of something new, even if they don't look like beginnings. Starting over requires a soft kind of courage, the kind that doesn't shout. It's the courage of stepping into unfamiliar territory, the courage of releasing what once defined you, the courage of trusting a future you've never seen, the courage of rebuilding, not from nothing, but from truth. And truth, especially after a long period of pretending or enduring, can feel both liberating and terrifying, because deep down you know this. Starting over means letting go of comfort, letting go of certainty, letting go of identities that no longer fit, letting go of versions of yourself that don't reflect who you are becoming. Letting go is painful, but staying stuck in a life that no longer aligns is far more painful. People often imagine starting over as a clean break, a fresh slate, a moment of clarity. In reality, it's messy. It's filled with doubt. It's layered with grief. It's tangled with fear and hope. You question yourself. Am I making the right choice? What if I fail? What if it doesn't get better? What if I'm not ready? But every time you ask, what if, a quieter question follows. What if I'm meant for more? And that question, that tiny, courageous question, becomes the seed of your new beginning. Starting over doesn't require a perfect plan. It requires willingness. Willingness to take one step, even if it's shaky. Willingness to move forward, even when your past tries to pull you back. Willingness to believe in possibilities you can't yet see. This willingness is the birthplace of transformation. But what makes starting over truly profound is this. You don't begin from zero. You begin from experience, from lessons learned, from truth reclaimed, from strength you gained without even noticing, from clarity that only comes after breaking, healing, and evolving. You are not the person you were before. You are someone wiser, softer, stronger, and far more aligned with yourself. And that not certainty, not perfection, is what makes you ready to begin again. One of the most disorienting parts of starting over is the way it creates space. Space you're not used to yet. When you let go of what no longer fits, whether it's a relationship, a dream, a version of yourself, or an entire way of living, you're left with an emptiness that can feel unsettling. This emptiness isn't a failure. It's an opening. The space where new beginnings gather strength. The silence where new clarity forms. The quiet where you learn to hear your own voice again. In the early stages of starting over, this space might feel uncomfortable. You're not used to having room to think, room to breathe, room to choose without pressure. You're not used to asking yourself what you want without someone else's expectations shaping the answer. You're not used to building from alignment instead of survival. And so the emptiness feels unfamiliar. You may try to fill it quickly, with distractions, with temporary comfort, with plans that aren't rooted in truth. You may try to run from it because the silence brings up all the emotions you avoided while your life was busy or chaotic. But the space created by starting over is not meant to be filled immediately. It's meant to be understood. This space allows you to rest from the emotional pressure you've carried for too long. It gives your heart room to heal without rushing. It gives your mind room to unclutter itself. It gives your spirit room to recalibrate. This is where inner realignment begins, gently, slowly, in ways that may be invisible at first. As you sit in this space, you begin to notice things you were too overwhelmed to see before. You notice the desires you pushed aside. You notice the dreams you abandoned because you didn't think they were possible. You notice the parts of yourself you neglected to keep others comfortable. You notice how deeply you were craving authenticity. And gradually, you begin to feel something you haven't felt in a long time. Possibility. Not the kind that overwhelms you, the kind that invites you. Possibility that whispers instead of pressures. Possibility that sparks gentle curiosity. Possibility that feels more like returning to yourself than becoming someone new. This is the moment when starting over shifts from fear to hope. You begin imagining a life that feels lighter. You begin seeing options you once thought were out of reach. You begin trusting that there are paths you haven't discovered yet. You begin understanding that your story didn't end, it expanded. But with this expansion comes another essential part of starting over: the courage to move slowly. We live in a world that values speed, outcomes, and visible progress. But real beginnings don't rush. Real beginnings take shape gradually, as you learn to listen to your intuition instead of your fear. You don't need to know the entire path. You just need to take the next honest step. Maybe that step is learning to say no. Maybe that step is creating a boundary. Maybe that step is resting without guilt. Maybe that step is allowing yourself to dream again. Maybe that step is admitting what you truly want. These small steps matter. They accumulate. They redirect you. They rebuild you quietly and powerfully. Starting over is not a dramatic leap. It's a series of gentle shifts that eventually change the entire direction of your life. As you move further into the process of starting over, something remarkable happens. Your past begins to lose its power. The memories that once held you captive start to feel lighter. The regrets that once weighed you down soften at the edges. The pain that once defined your choices becomes information rather than identity. Starting over doesn't erase your past, it reframes it. You begin to see that what you once called failure was actually redirection. What you once called loss was space being made for something better. What you once called weakness was courage in disguise. What you once called a mistake was a lesson that reshaped you. This reframing doesn't happen instantly. It arrives slowly, woven into the little ways you begin to feel more like yourself again. You notice that you're kinder to your past self, less judgmental, more understanding. You begin saying things like, "I didn't know any better then. I was trying my best. I needed that experience to become who I am now. I see why I held on as long as I did." This shift is healing, because self-forgiveness is one of the deepest forms of freedom. Starting over gives you that freedom. It frees you from the pressure to have known everything ahead of time. It frees you from punishing yourself for choices made in fear. It frees you from the belief that your worth is tied to your past outcomes. It frees you from patterns that were rooted in survival, not self-awareness. And when that freedom settles into your heart, something else awakens: self-trust. When you've had to rebuild from a place of honesty, you start to trust yourself differently, more deeply, more steadily, more quietly. You trust your intuition because it guided you out of places that drained you. You trust your boundaries because they protect your peace. You trust your decisions because they come from clarity, not desperation. You trust your desires because they come from alignment, not scarcity. And with this trust comes a new sense of identity. You're no longer the person who tolerated too much. You're no longer the person who stayed out of fear. You're no longer the person who confused comfort with belonging. You're no longer the person who believed starting over was failure. You've become someone who can let go without losing herself, someone who can begin again without collapsing, someone who can see her past with compassion and her future with hope, someone who can build a life based on who she is now, not who she was forced to be. This is the transformation that makes starting over so profound. It teaches you that endings are not the collapse of your life. They are the unveiling of your next self, the self who is wiser, the self who is more grounded, the self who is more self-aware, the self who refuses to shrink, the self who knows she deserves a life that reflects her worth. But starting over also teaches you that growth doesn't always look like expansion. Sometimes growth looks like releasing. Sometimes growth looks like realignment. Sometimes growth looks like choosing the path of peace over the path of pressure. Sometimes growth looks like rebuilding slowly, patiently, intentionally. And eventually, after the confusion, after the loneliness, after the fear, you reach another unexpected moment. You feel grateful that your life fell apart. Not because the pain was pleasant, not because the loss was easy, not because starting over was simple, but because it brought you back to yourself. There will come a day, soft, unannounced, quiet in a way only you will notice, when you finally realize you're no longer rebuilding, you're living. You wake up and your chest feels lighter. You make decisions without second-guessing your worth. You catch yourself smiling in moments where you once felt weighed down. You notice that your peace comes naturally now, not as something you have to fight for. This is the moment you understand what starting over truly gave you. Not a new life, a new you. A you who trusts her heart even when the path is unclear. A you who knows how to walk away when something hurts more than it heals. A you who sees her own needs as valid, important, and worthy of respect. A you who honors her intuition instead of silencing it. A you who can begin again without abandoning herself. Starting over didn't make you someone different. It made you someone more honest. It taught you how to build a life that reflects your truth instead of your fears. It taught you how to choose alignment instead of attachment. It taught you how to create boundaries that protect your peace. It taught you how to value your emotional safety as much as you value love. It taught you how to shape a life from intention rather than circumstance. And perhaps most beautifully, it taught you this: you can lose everything you thought you needed and still become someone stronger, wiser, and more whole. This realization changes how you see your future. You no longer cling to familiarity out of fear. You no longer settle for almost love. You no longer reshape yourself just to be accepted. You no longer sacrifice your well-being to keep something from falling apart. Instead, you build your life slowly, intentionally, gently, with compassion as your anchor and clarity as your guide. You choose connections that feel steady. You choose environments that support your growth. You choose opportunities that inspire you instead of drain you. You choose yourself without guilt. And as you continue forward, you begin to feel something you weren't sure you'd ever feel again. A sense of possibility that feels safe. A sense of hope that feels grounded. A sense of future that feels inviting. A sense of self that feels whole. This is the soft strength of starting over. Not the strength of proving yourself, but the strength of returning to yourself. Starting over did not weaken you. It refined you. It revealed you. It reconnected you to the parts of yourself that life's heaviness once buried. And now you step into the next chapter not as someone who is rebuilding, but as someone who is ready. Ready for alignment, ready for deeper love, ready for richer peace, ready for a life that feels like your own. A life built not from survival, but from truth. You've reached the end of this listening. The complete book contains 15 essays, written to be returned to over time. Some may stay with you immediately. Others may surface later, when you least expect them. If these reflections resonated with you, the full book is available on Amazon in paperback and ebook formats. Reading the essays slowly, in your own time, can offer a different kind of closeness, one that unfolds page by page. If you'd like to hear more audiobooks and spoken books like this, you're welcome to subscribe to Viventa Audio. New readings are added regularly across ideas, life, work, and reflection, all shared calmly and without rush. Thank you for spending this time here. Let the words settle where they will. There is nothing more you need to carry.